I was on a solo hike through the dense forest, trying to get away from the noise of the city. The sun had just started to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the path. The air was thick and humid, and the quiet was almost unsettling. I wasn't sure if it was because I was alone or if something else was making me feel uneasy. I'd been walking for hours when I noticed something strange. A flicker of movement ahead, just beyond the trees. I paused, squinting to see if it was an animal or just a trick of the light. But then I heard it, something rustling in the bushes, close by. It didn't sound like a deer or a squirrel. It was heavier, deliberate, like something was watching me. I pushed the thought aside and kept moving. The path narrowed, and the trees grew thicker. The silence was heavy now, and the deeper I went, the more I felt like I was being followed. The rustling continued, just behind me, but when I turned around, there was nothing. Just the forest. Just the trees. But the feeling didn't go away. I couldn't shake the sense that something was there, waiting. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A small figure, barely more than a shadow, darting between the trees. I froze. It was too quick to be a person. It moved with a speed and agility that couldn't be human. I took a deep breath and forced myself to move forward, telling myself it was just an animal, a monkey maybe. There were monkeys in these woods, right? But I couldn't stop the chill creeping up my spine. I picked up the pace, the air growing colder. My footsteps quickened, and that's when I heard it again, the rustling. Closer now. Closer than before. My heart was pounding in my chest as I broke into a run, not sure if I was running from the shadow or just from the fear that had taken hold of me. I didn't look back. I just ran, the sound of heavy footsteps behind me growing louder, matching my own. The path ahead was unclear, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of the woods, out of whatever this was, and then I saw the clearing. It was a small, open space where the trees thinned out, with the fading light of the sun casting long shadows. But what made me stop dead in my tracks wasn't the light or the openness, it was the figure standing in the middle of the clearing. A man. He was tall, wearing a tattered jacket and staring at me with wide, wild eyes. I didn't move. I just stood there, frozen. That's when I saw it, the monkey. It was standing next to the man, its eyes locked on me too. The thing wasn't like the monkeys I'd seen in zoos. This one had an unnatural look to it, almost human-like in its expressions, its eyes gleaming with a strange intelligence. Didn't know what to do. The man stepped forward, but his movements weren't normal. They were jerky, unnatural, as if he wasn't in full control of himself. And the monkey, he stepped forward too, like it was his leader, guiding him. In a panic, I turned and bolted back the way I came. My mind was racing, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to get out of there. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually, I stumbled upon a small ranger station. The door was unlocked, and I rushed inside, locking it behind me. My chest was heaving with fear as I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. The ranger station had a map on the wall, and when I looked at it, I saw that I was closer to civilization than I thought. I wasn't deep in the forest anymore, but that didn't make the encounter any less terrifying. The next day, I went back to the spot where I'd seen the man and the monkey. There was no sign of them. No footprints, no broken branches, no trace of anything out of the ordinary. It was as if they'd never been there at all. I don't know if I imagined it or if it was real, but I couldn't forget what I saw. And I'll never go back into those woods alone again. There's something about that place, something dark. I don't know what it was that followed me that day, but I do know this. Some things are better left unexplored. I never expected a trip to the jungle to turn out like this. I went on the expedition to explore, to get some photographs, and to escape from the stress of city life. But something wasn't right from the start. The air felt different, heavy and thick, as if it was holding its breath. Still, I pushed on. I needed the experience. I was walking along a narrow, overgrown path, the sounds of the jungle filling my ears, the chirping of insects, the rustle of leaves, the occasional call of a distant bird. But then there was a strange sound, one that didn't quite belong. It was a low, throaty growl, like an animal trying to communicate, but it wasn't any animal I recognized. I froze. My heart thudded loudly in my chest. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was probably just a monkey or some small creature. I kept moving, trying to stay calm, but then I saw it. A man, crouching by a tree. He wasn't facing me, but I could see his outline through the thick foliage. At first, I thought he might be another hiker or guide, but then I noticed how still he was, almost unnatural, like he was waiting for something. And that's when I saw the eyes. There was something wrong with them, too wide, too intense. A shiver crawled down my spine. He wasn't just some random person, he felt off, wrong. I backed up slowly, trying to remain as quiet as possible, my senses on high alert. I turned around, but the path behind me was no longer clear. The jungle had changed. The trees were denser, the underbrush thicker. It felt like I was trapped in some sort of maze, with no way out. Thought of calling for help, but my phone had no signal out here, and I knew I couldn't rely on anyone coming to find me in time. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, almost suffocating. I had no choice but to keep walking. I stumbled forward, trying to keep my breathing steady, but then I heard it again, the growl. It was closer this time, right behind me. I turned quickly, my eyes darting through the trees. Nothing. Just shadows. My pulse raced. I knew I couldn't keep walking in circles forever. That's when I saw the movement. In the branches above me, something large and fast was leaping from tree to tree. It wasn't a bird, it wasn't a deer, it was too quick, too fluid. A monkey, but different, somehow. Its eyes were wide, unnaturally bright, and its movements were jerky and unpredictable. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt frozen. The growl came again, but this time it wasn't coming from behind me. It was in front of me, echoing from the shadows. I wasn't alone. The jungle felt alive with eyes that were watching, waiting. Then, the man appeared again, only this time, he was moving towards me, his eyes still wide and unblinking. My stomach twisted. I realized something in that moment. He wasn't just some lost wanderer. He was part of the jungle, in some twisted way. I wasn't just dealing with wildlife, I was dealing with something darker. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. My instincts kicked in, and I ran. I pushed through the thick brush, dodging trees, tripping over roots. I could hear the monkey's growls now, growing louder, closer. It was following me, moving just out of sight. I could feel its presence, the weight of it, just behind me. The man was nowhere to be seen now, but I didn't care. I had to get out. I ran for what felt like hours, the jungle becoming less dense, until finally, I saw light ahead. I pushed through the last line of trees and found myself at the edge of a clearing. My breath was ragged, my body exhausted, but I could see a road, and in the distance, a car moving slowly along it. I waved my arms frantically, hoping they'd see me. The car stopped. The driver looked confused, but immediately pulled over. Without hesitation, I jumped in, and we drove away. The driver didn't ask many questions, just giving me a concerned glance. I think he could tell something wasn't right. It wasn't until I was back at the hotel that I took a deep breath and let myself relax for the first time. But something stayed with me. The eyes, the growls, the way the jungle had felt alive in a way that wasn't natural. I'd made it out, but I knew that whatever I had encountered in that jungle, it wasn't something I could ever forget. And when I looked at my photos from the trip later, there was one picture that stood out. A blurry shot I didn't remember taking. In the background, hidden in the shadows, was the unmistakable shape of a monkey. But its eyes were watching me, just like they had in the jungle encounter. I never thought I'd be in a situation like this. It all started when I decided to take a solo hike into the deep jungle. I'd heard rumors about the place, people saying it was too dangerous to go alone. But I didn't care, I was determined to push myself. So, I packed my bag, grabbed my map, and headed into the thick trees. At first, it was peaceful. The sounds of birds, the rustling of leaves, the wind pushing through the branches. But after a few hours, that calm started to shift. The further I went, the quieter it became. The birds stopped singing, the air felt heavier, like something was watching me. I shrugged it off as paranoia, maybe just the isolation starting to get to me. Then I saw it. It was quick, just a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was a deer or some other animal. But when I looked, there was nothing there. I kept walking, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I tried to keep calm, telling myself it was just my imagination, but then I heard something. A low growl. I froze. The growl wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't the sound of a typical jungle animal. It was deeper, more threatening. I turned slowly, scanning the shadows between the trees. That's when I saw it, a pair of eyes, glowing faintly in the dark. It wasn't the eyes of a predator. I was always one for working the land, so when the opportunity to take on a small farm in the middle of nowhere came up, I grabbed it. The property was cheap, but it came with a donkey. Honestly, I didn't care much for animals, but it seemed harmless enough, so I figured I'd take it on. The donkey was old, thin, and had a rough-looking coat. It had a sharp gaze that felt like it could see right through you. But hey, it was just a donkey, right? I spent the first few days getting settled in, chopping wood, fixing fences, and setting up the barn. The donkey was always there, standing at the far end of the field, watching me. At first, I thought it was just curious, but it started to feel unsettling. I could swear it was following my every move. Whenever I'd look up, those eyes would be on me, unblinking, focused. One evening, as the sun was dipping below the horizon, I decided to take the donkey out for a walk. It was strange, but I thought it would be good for both of us. I grabbed the rope, tied it around its neck, and led it toward the nearby creek. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth, and the sky had that deep orange glow you get just before it gets dark. But something was off. The donkey seemed agitated. It tugged at the rope, jerking its head back, as though it didn't want to go further. I stopped and tugged back, trying to calm it. But then, just as I was about to give up and head back, I heard it. A low, scraping sound. Like something was dragging along the ground just out of sight. I froze. The donkey, still uneasy, started to bray loudly. I looked around, but there was nothing. The trees stood still, and the creek trickled along as it always did. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I tried to ignore it and kept walking. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. The scrape continued, louder now. It sounded like it was coming from behind me, getting closer. My heart began to race. I glanced over my shoulder. The donkey's eyes were wide, its body tense, and it was staring at the bushes, its ears flicking back and forth. Suddenly, a movement in the shadows caught my eye. A large, dark shape emerged from the trees. It was low to the ground, and as it moved, it almost seemed to be dragging itself. The donkey let out a terrified scream, pulling away from me and charging back down the path toward the barn. My breath caught in my throat. I was frozen, unable to move as the figure drew closer. It wasn't a person, not quite. It was something else, something heavy and slow. I could see its ragged form now, and the way it seemed to slither rather than walk, dragging itself along the earth. I stumbled back, my chest tight, panic flooding me. It stopped a few feet away, and for a long moment, there was only silence. The wind died, the creek's noise faded. It was as if the whole world held its breath. Then, in an instant, it lunged toward me. I reacted before I could think, running as fast as my legs could carry me. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind screaming to make it to the barn. I could hear the thing behind me, dragging, scraping the ground with terrifying speed. I finally reached the barn, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me, my hands shaking violently. I barely slept that night, listening to the sounds of the donkey still panicking outside. It wasn't until morning that I dared to go out again. The field was empty. No creature, no figure, no dark shape, just the quiet stretch of land that I had once thought was peaceful, but the donkey was gone. I searched the property for hours, calling its name, but it was as though it had vanished completely. I've been here for weeks now, and I still don't know what I saw that night. I've tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, maybe the stress of moving out here playing tricks on me. But every time I look at the empty barn, I can't shake the feeling that something else is out there, something that wasn't there before. I'm leaving this place. The land, the animals, the strange figure, it's all too much. I don't know where the donkey went or what it saw, but I've made up my mind. I can't stay here anymore. Whatever it was that I witnessed, it's not something I want to face again. I packed up and left for good. And for the first time since I arrived, I can finally breathe. I was just out on the farm, working late, when I noticed the donkey standing near the edge of the woods. The sun had already set, and the light was fading fast. I had been tying up some tools when I heard it, an odd, low sound, almost like a growl, coming from the direction of the donkey. It wasn't the usual bray I was used to. This was something different. I figured it was just the wind or maybe a trick of my tired mind. But the donkey stood still, staring into the dark trees, its ears twitching like it was trying to pick up something I couldn't hear. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, so I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward it, thinking maybe the donkey was spooked by some wild animal. As I got closer, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The donkey's eyes were wide, almost too wide, and its breath was heavy, like it had been running. I called out to it softly, but it didn't respond. Its gaze was fixed, unwavering, into the woods. It wasn't the kind of behavior I had ever seen before. It looked terrified. I knelt down beside it, trying to calm it, but the donkey jerked its head away from me, still staring at the dark trees. Then, I heard it, movement in the brush. Twigs snapping. My heart raced. I stood up, trying to shine my flashlight into the shadows, but I couldn't see anything. Still, I could feel it. Something was there, something in the woods, watching. My instinct was to turn and run back to the barn, but I couldn't leave the donkey. I looked at it, and for the first time, I wondered if I had made a mistake staying here. The growl came again, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the brush. I wasn't imagining it anymore. Whatever was out there was real, and it was getting closer, grabbed the donkey's halter and tried to lead it back, but it wouldn't budge. It reared up, kicking its legs wildly, pulling away from me. I had never seen it so panicked, and suddenly I was terrified too. The flashlight was shaking in my hand as I tried to guide the animal back to safety. Then, out of nowhere, a figure stepped from the shadows. My breath caught in my throat. It was a man, a large, burly figure with a hood pulled low over his face. I couldn't make out any features, but he was there, standing in the dark, just watching us. The growling had stopped. The air had gone still, like the world had frozen. I took a step back, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The man didn't move, just stood there, silent. I tried to call out, but my throat went dry. I turned, yanking the donkey's lead harder this time, and finally, it started moving with me, pulling me back toward the barn. The man didn't follow, but I could feel his presence, like he was still there, waiting. I didn't stop running until we were inside the barn, the door slamming shut behind us. I stood there, gasping for breath, watching the donkey's frantic eyes as it circled in the small space. Whatever that man was, he didn't follow us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something I didn't. That he had been waiting for something, maybe even for me. The next morning, I checked the farm, walking around the perimeter. There was no sign of anyone. No tracks, no evidence anyone had been out there. The donkey seemed calmer, grazing quietly in the corner of the field. Still don't know what happened that night, but the feeling hasn't gone away. The woods are quieter now, but every time I look out at the trees, I can't help but feel like someone's still watching. And I know, deep down, that whatever it was, it's still out there. It was a quiet evening when I made the decision to take the old donkey out for a walk. I hadn't been able to do it in a while, but with the weather finally cool enough, I figured it was a good time. The donkey, named Gus, had been with me for years. He wasn't much to look at, as skinny, with a coat that had long since lost its shine, but he was a good companion, slow and steady. I led him out of the barn and onto the narrow trail that ran behind our farm. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky a deep orange. The kind of evening that made everything feel still, almost too still. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the dirt and the occasional rustle of Gus's hooves, but as we got further into the woods, I began to notice something off. Gus was unusually skittish, tugging at the rope, pulling back like he wanted to run. At first, I thought maybe he was just being stubborn, but something in the way he moved, his head jerking around, ears flicking, made me feel uneasy. I stopped and looked around. The woods were dense, but there was nothing particularly strange. No strange noises, no obvious signs of danger. Still, a gut feeling told me to turn back. But before I could make the decision, I heard it. The sound of something heavy moving through the brush. Not just leaves or small animals, but something big, something deliberate. I took a step back, and Gus whinnied. His body was trembling now, the rope tight in my hand as he jerked backward, pulling hard against me. That's when I saw it. Through the thick trees, just beyond the edge of the path, something big and dark shifted. It wasn't a deer, it wasn't a bear, it was something else. I couldn't make out details, just the silhouette of something large and moving slowly. I didn't hesitate. I tugged Gus's rope and turned, trying to lead him back the way we came. But Gus wasn't having it. He refused to move, his hooves digging into the dirt, like he was planted in place. I tried again, harder this time. I had never been out here before, not alone at least. The jungle felt different when you weren't with the herd. Normally, I would stay close to the others, but today I had wandered off, chasing something that had caught my attention, a rustling noise in the bushes. At first, I thought it was just a small animal, but as I followed the sound, it grew louder and seemed to pull me deeper into the trees. The air was thick, sticky with humidity, and the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves hung in the air. I realized I couldn't hear any other animals, no birds calling or insects buzzing. It felt wrong. I tried turning back, but everything looked the same. My surroundings blurred together in an endless sea of green. That's when I heard it. A snap of a twig behind me, then silence. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't alone anymore. My instinct told me to run, but where? I felt like I was being watched. The hairs on my back stood up. I turned, but there was nothing. Just trees, shadows, and the oppressive weight of the jungle pressing in. I pushed through, my breath getting heavier, legs aching, but I couldn't stop. The ground was uneven, roots sticking up like traps, and the air felt thick with the kind of stillness you only get when something is waiting. I started to panic, my hooves slapping against the muddy earth as I rushed forward, but there was no sign of an exit. Then I saw it, a flash of movement in the corner of my eye. I froze. A figure, tall and thin, with something odd about its limbs, was standing still between the trees, barely visible. I couldn't make out much, but it looked like a man, or at least something close to one. It wasn't moving, but I could feel it. It was watching me. My body was frozen, my mind screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure disappeared. Not into the trees, no, it just vanished like smoke in the wind. I took off, not caring where I was going anymore. I needed to get out. My hoofs pounded the ground, and the familiar path I had wandered off from seemed to open up in front of me. There was no sign of that thing anymore, no more watching eyes. Just the sound of my own frantic breathing and the rustling of leaves as I moved. Finally, I stumbled out of the jungle. My herd was there, grazing calmly by the edge of the trees. I had made it out. I don't know what that was, some kind of illusion or something real. But I know one thing for sure. I won't be straying from the herd again. I've learned it that much. There are things in the jungle that don't make sense, things that stay hidden and only show themselves when you're too far from safety. But I made it out. And next time, I'll be staying close to the others. Always. I've been living alone in the jungle for 3 months now. It wasn't my choice. I got stuck here after the truck I was in broke down. I wasn't even supposed to be in the jungle, but that's how it goes sometimes. It was supposed to be a quick drive to a small village, but the breakdown was the start of something far worse than I ever imagined. The truck driver left to find help, and I was supposed to wait in the cabin, but after hours with no word, I decided to walk out. I figured I could find my way back. The jungle was dense, thick with trees, vines, and a constant, oppressive heat. It felt like the whole place was alive, watching me. I thought I'd be able to figure it out. The problem? The deeper I went, the more lost I got. After the first few days, I was struggling. Food was scarce, water even more so. I had no map, no phone, and the forest had a way of disorienting me. Every direction looked the same. There were no signs of people, just the sounds of birds, insects, and distant rustling. And then, on the 4th day, I saw it. I was sitting by a small creek, trying to catch my breath, when I saw a cow. At first, I thought I was imagining things. A cow. In the jungle. But there it was, just standing in the clearing, staring at me. I had never seen a cow in these parts before. It wasn't like the cows I'd seen in farms back home. This one was wild, its fur matted and tangled, its eyes wide, unnaturally calm. I didn't think much of it at first, but something about the cow felt off. It wasn't just the fact that it was in the jungle, it was the way it moved. Every time I tried to get closer to it, it backed away, always keeping its distance. And yet, whenever I walked in the opposite direction, it seemed to follow me, just out of sight. I thought I was being paranoid, but this kept happening for days. I started to notice more strange things. The jungle itself felt different. The sounds of animals had quieted down. It was almost as if they were being replaced by a heavy silence. Every night, I'd hear the sound of the cow moving around outside my shelter, just beyond the reach of my firelight. Sometimes, I'd hear it snorting, like it was too close, but never quite visible. The real fear set in when I noticed something I couldn't ignore. The cow wasn't just following me, it was leading me. Every time I wandered, the cow would appear at the edge of my vision, guiding me in a specific direction, always to places that felt wrong. To darker parts of the jungle. To areas that didn't feel natural. To places where the trees were denser, and the air more suffocating. One evening, after following the cow for hours, I finally found myself at the edge of a steep ravine. I had no idea how I had gotten there. The jungle had shifted around me, and I realized the cow had led me into a trap. There was no way forward, and no way back. It was as if the jungle itself had closed in on me. I tried to climb down, but the ground was too unstable. I knew I was close to the edge, but I was too exhausted to make a clear decision. That's when I saw the cow again, standing at the top of the ravine, watching me. I felt my heart race, and for the first time, I truly understood the meaning of fear. I was in the jungle, and I was alone. No one was coming to help me, but then, something unexpected happened. The cow turned around. Slowly. It started to walk away, and I don't know why, but I felt like it wasn't just leaving me behind. It was showing me the way out. I decided to follow it, trusting for the first time that it wasn't a trick. I stumbled through the jungle, exhausted, not sure if I was even going in the right direction, but I kept moving. And just as the sun was setting, I saw something through the trees, a path, a road. It wasn't much, but it was real. I don't know how the cow knew the way out, but I followed it all the way to the edge of the jungle. I was so tired, so relieved. And when I finally stepped out onto that road, I looked back once, just in time to see the cow disappear into the jungle. It wasn't a ghost, and it wasn't some wild beast. It was just a cow, a creature of the jungle that knew its way better than I ever could. I didn't need to understand why it helped me. All I knew was that it had. And for that, I was alive. The jungle was thick with shadows that stretched long into the evening. I had been walking for hours, lost. The path that seemed so clear earlier had disappeared into the dense trees, leaving me with nothing but the crunching of leaves beneath my feet, and the occasional rustling from deep within the underbrush. I had come to the jungle to find something, a cow. Not any cow, but one that was rumored to roam the wild here. The locals spoke about it like it was some kind of mystery, a cow that had lived in the jungle for years, surviving on its own. They said it was a creature of habit, always near the river at dawn and dusk, moving through the trees like a shadow. I'd heard the stories too, but I had never believed them. I thought it was all nonsense, until today. I had stumbled across the cow's tracks earlier in the day, deep in the forest. The footprints were massive, too big for any normal cow. I felt a chill creep up my spine, but I pressed on. I had to see it, to prove to myself that it was real. Now, hours later, I was no longer sure what I had been chasing. The sky above was already dimming, and the jungle had started to close in around me. I hadn't heard a single sound from the cow since the morning, but something was there. The silence was unnerving. I could feel the weight of the jungle pressing down on me. Then, I heard it. A soft rustling, then a snap of a twig. My heart skipped. I stopped dead in my tracks, straining to hear more. It wasn't the wind, this was something moving, something alive. I glanced around, scanning the darkening forest. The rustling came again, closer this time. My pulse quickened. Slowly, cautiously, I turned to face the sound. My eyes locked onto something moving between the trees. A figure. Large, unmistakable. It wasn't a normal cow. It was bigger, much bigger. The dark shape of the animal moved with an unnatural grace, its body blending into the shadows like it was part of the jungle itself. I stood frozen, unsure if I should run, unsure if it was even real. For what felt like an eternity, it stared at me, its dark eyes reflecting the last light of day. The jungle had gone completely still. No more rustling, no more movement, just me and this creature, locked in some silent standoff. But then, it moved. Not toward me, but away from me. It turned and walked deeper into the trees. I was left standing there, breathless, watching as it vanished into the jungle. I stayed there for a while longer, trying to steady my nerves. The silence was deafening, but somehow, I felt safe again. That thing, whatever it was, hadn't attacked me. It hadn't tried to chase me. It had simply existed. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, I decided I had to get out of the jungle. The cow had been real, but there was no need to follow it anymore. It wasn't some wild creature out to get me. It was just living its life, in the way it knew best. I found my